We're going to do episode number 7 with my homie, Dylan Weisman. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 7 of the GTL podcast. My name is Bill King. I am the host this week and every week. I am so excited for episode number 7. Today, our guest is Dylan Weisman. Dylan is a lot of things. Dylan is a former operations and analytics specialist in B2B tech. He then went over and worked in the crypto space, working on product and analytics. Dylan is actually most known for being a nosebleed, high-stakes poker player. Dylan is also a coach at a website called Upswing Poker, where it actually helps you learn how to play poker at a serious level. If poker is something you've always enjoyed, Dylan is one of the best that I have ever seen with taking really complex things and making them easily digestible. This guy is considered one of the best in the world. He's somebody that I have admired from afar for a long time. We never really spoke directly, but when I found out that we had so many things in common, I said, hey, you know what? I need to reach out to this guy because a lot of people don't realize I played poker professionally for several years. I don't really talk about it a lot on the podcast, but today you will find out why I was so passionate about poker, still am. The people you meet in the space are so intelligent and think clearly about strategy, about life, about what the future is. And Dylan is definitely one of those people. I want to talk more about the intersection between crypto and growth and poker and all the things that I'm passionate about, because that keeps me fired up about doing this podcast. I hope you enjoy this episode, and please tell Dylan you enjoyed it. Enjoy episode number 7 of the GTO podcast. Thank you. See ya.
We all gotta grow, this is not optional. That's why we need to start the show. Growth theory optimal. Growth is full of obstacles, spark a hypothesis. You gotta play your hand, don't just wait and be an optimist. And now it's time to know what growth theory is. Let's build. Bill King, host of the show, here he is. We going all in, we unstoppable. Check it out, this is Growth Theory Optimal. You're checking out the Growth Theory Optimal podcast with your host, Bill King.
All right, so Dylan Weisman, it would actually be a huge mistake for me to create a podcast where the name is constructed off of a poker analogy for Game Theory Optimal, and I have Dr. GTO here, affectionately called, and shout out Joey. Him and I were actually just talking through DM, and I was just telling him how many random things we have in common and stuff like that. But anyway, so we have Dylan Weisman here. First of all, a fan of Dylan's content and all the things that he's been putting out in the poker world. I assume that most people that are here and listening to this probably have no idea about some of the cool stuff that he's working on. So we're going to change that today. Dylan, thank you for coming on the GTO podcast. It's a big honor of mine to have you here.
Hell yeah, I'm very happy to be here. When you reached out to me and were saying, hey, I have a podcast on the intersection of poker and business, I was like, well, that makes sense. I'd love to talk to you. Because it as we were just saying, it's rare to kind of have that overlap in a really robust way, because there's only a few really high level poker players that actually transition over to business, but those that do end up crushing if they were operating at those high levels in poker. And a lot of people in business want to play poker at a high level, but they end up just kind of being the recreational at the table. And so to have the high level overlap, I think, is a very fun conversation to have.
For sure, yeah. Chris Sparks is on my list too. I want to have him on and talk about some of the stuff that he's working on and everything like that. So I'll eventually get it out. It's just, like I haven't really thought about like poker like seriously for a while, and I still play it like Encore, or did for like 3 months, and then they shut the whole place down. But anyway, so I'm really excited to have you here, because I think I've gotten so many requests from people who are like, oh, talk more about poker. And it's like, I'd rather have a conversation with someone who's like has similar kind of like foundations with business and poker, because we probably have different perspectives than most folks. Definitely. So Dylan, you've done so much cool stuff. I was taking notes before, and I sent them over to you. And you started your career. I think, was this after school, the UC Santa Barbara?
No. So I studied financial mathematics and statistics at UC Santa Barbara, and then while I was there is when I did undergrad research in epidemic modeling, which is super cool, and actually ended up being really relevant. Last year, I was able to read all of the public papers that were coming out around COVID and actually have context, so that was pretty cool. I also, during college, started my own tutoring company, had my first ever failed startup. It was great.
We've all been there.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy I did it in college. I learned a lot of good lessons for free. It was fantastic. Mm-hmm. And then also when I was in college, I ended up living in Vietnam for 5 months and doing some consulting for my 2 professors that were there. So that was kind of my college experience.
That must have been a fun experience. I that's one place I've not been in the world, is Vietnam. I would love to go.
Vietnam is my soul place. I love it there probably more than anywhere else.
Nice. I'll have to check it out. So you were doing research and you were doing basically quantitative analysis, right? And then you moved into a consulting thing, a tutoring thing, which I thought was actually kind of awesome because I've watched your content on Upswing, and there are some people who are fantastic at understanding data, and there are some people who are fantastic at telling stories about data. And so you rarely have a combination of someone who is in the weeds and actually like writing the models, but also able to explain it. And that translates 100% to the stuff that you put out in Upswing. I just want to say that's really cool.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. I started tutoring when I was 12. Literally in 6th grade, I had my first math client. And I think that something that I feel very fortunate in my current life is that I've been able to bring that back in a very real way. There isn't really anything more gratifying to me than being able to communicate information and have someone actually grow and learn with it. And so that's been really fun to be able to do.
Yeah, I felt the same way when I started at HubSpot. I would have taken any job they would have given me. I would have been the janitor, but I knew it was like going to be a huge success. And consulting I found extremely rewarding because I am a huge nerd. I like to learn things, and when I meet other people who are also passionate about learning things, like that is the perfect scenario for me.
Yeah, you got to ride the stoke. Yeah, you ride the stoke train. It's like you get stoked, they get stoked. You're like one person's the conductor, the other person's running around. It's fantastic.
Yep, it was like the old 2+2 forum days, the old days.
Exactly.
So then you were at Rocket Fuel, which I actually didn't realize. It looks like it's been acquired twice, right? It looks like it got acquired by Seismic and then also was sold to Amazon. Is that what happened?
I don't know what happened after Seismic. So Rocket Fuel is actually a fascinating story of like just looking it up from a pure like macroeconomic perspective. It's so fascinating because they were one of the first people to bring machine learning into programmatic advertising, which was an amazing niche. And it's not like they did anything really special. They just took logistic regression models, applied some pretty robust machine learning, and then used the same infrastructure that you'd use for high frequency trading, and then applied that to the programmatic world. And they just slaughtered for a long time. Their product was fantastic.
Have you read Chaos Monkeys by Antonio Garcia Martinez?
I have not, no.
I'll have to send you the link to the book. He was a quant, I think, at Goldman, and then he ended up going over to Facebook and being the ads PM, and they were applying a lot of the same models. It's really cool.
It's very interesting because when I was in college, I never thought, oh, you're going to go into advertising, and I, to be honest, had like an aversion to it. And then when I got hired to Rocket Fuel, like I was a marketing analyst, but they pretty much immediately made me the subject matter expert on the actual modeling side because of my background in regression statistical modeling in general. Like that glimpse at the beginning of my career was super helpful because I was like, holy crap, machine learning is absolutely the most powerful thing I've ever seen. It is going to change pretty much every industry that I can, not every industry, but it's going to be a massive disruptor. And to be a part of a company that was one of the original disruptors, especially in something like advertising, was very cool to see. It was also fascinating to see how they mismanaged it so heinously at a company level, because they had this fantastic product with, once they figured it out, really good product market fit. They were like the poster child for an inefficient Silicon Valley startup. They had this massive like headquarters that wasn't necessary. Their sales teams were spending like tens of millions of dollars a year that weren't coming back effectively. And they were running EBITDA negative, even though they were just printing millions and millions in gross per month because they just weren't effective in actually managing their business. And so getting to start my career there, and I had some fantastic mentors. Pretty much, I had a team of badass women at the beginning of my career teach me why I was bad. And that was super helpful. I had 3 specific mentors that I can remember: Louisa, Kat, and then my friend James. I had multiple mentors at this company, but they all pretty much sat me down at different points in my career because I was transitioning from a place of being the best at something, which was poker, into still being intelligent, but not like, I was a 22-year-old kid who didn't know how to communicate.
It's frustrating, right?
Setting. It's frustrating, and I didn't know where my leaks were. And so I'm very fortunate that I had people who, with empathy and sometimes a little sternly, were able to communicate to me, hey, yeah, we get it. You know what's going on, but that doesn't mean that you can communicate in the way that you are. And having that experience at the beginning of my career is probably as much, if not more important than the actual like analytics background that I was able to get from that company.
That's so funny you said that, because I had Andrew Kaplan on. He used to be the head of growth at Postscript and Wistia, and we used to sit next to each other at HubSpot. And I talked to him about, he's now coaching people on growth leadership and talking about, some of the things he's learned along the way. And I look back at my career and I'm like, some of the things that were glaring holes in my game, or like leaks, that how we would call it in poker, were more kind of like the soft skills, because it's so easy to wrap your mind around what the tactical things are to do. But to get a team to go work on your growth experiment versus somebody else's, I was like, what do you mean? Like, isn't this the highest value one? And those are some of the holes that I've kind of learned just through, going through those processes and failing and kind of realizing that that's a big hole of mine,
It's funny because it's two sides of the same coin, because as a poker player, you have to have this really intense quantitative side. And if you're coming from the older school version of poker, there's also a really big empathy component, being able to understand how your opponent's processing information and then be able to adapt to it. In its current form, that's not as important in poker, and we can get into that's very nitty gritty. We can get into that later if we want. I found at the beginning of my career, I still had that empathy component where I very much understood what was going on with everybody, but I had no idea how I was presenting outwardly. So even if I could evaluate what was going on in the macro system and what everyone was thinking, I still wasn't moving through that space with as much grace as I needed to in order to actually be an effective leader, which is what I've been able to kind of transition to over time. It's a very humbling experience when you think you're the shit. And then people are like, hey, guess what? We all are the shit. Like my analytics team, everyone was just an absolute savage. Every single person from very different backgrounds, all have gone on to doing ridiculous things. I'm happy that that happened when it did, because I was able to get that out of the way and then get on to like really, really learning about business intelligence analytics and then growth in general from that company. Because those skill sets have just been ridiculously important to me throughout my entire career.
It's the classic tale. Like you build up enough skills to dominate a specific like skill or like goal. Your whole career before you become a leader is about executing on specific plans or objectives. And then all of a sudden the job changes, and all of a sudden these skills are not necessarily transferable. Like you have a great quant background, and we'll talk about more about like what you're doing in the future, because I think that's really interesting to think about how you build up those technical skills, and now you're working on some other stuff. So let me just quickly go through this. So you spent some time over at that company, and then you went over to a company called Fragrant Jewels, and then Toptal, which I'm familiar with. I think it's in the B2B space. And then you were at CoinCentral as a product and analytics lead. And I think that was from the Upswing crew, right? You guys were like doing the media component, and then this was the business end. Is that how it was working?
That's exactly correct. We were building out informational products because so for those of you unaware, Upswing Poker is the incumbent in the poker space for poker training. They're my main partner that I put out my poker training resources through. And the co-founders, 2 out of the 3 were literally the best poker players on the planet, Doug Polk and Ryan Fee. Yep. Really, really, really sharp dudes. Matt Coletta, the third partner, also a very sharp dude. He was more of the business aspect of that trio. And they pretty much after Fragrant Jewels and Toptal was a very interesting year and a half of my life, because they were both mishires, and either the team wasn't correct, or my manager wasn't correct, or the role wasn't correct for me. And so after that experience, I was very, very fervent in making sure that I didn't have that happen again. And what that turned out to be was me just building my own rules for myself. And that's pretty much what I've done for the past 4 years of my career. And it's turned out much, much better, because instead of trying to fit myself in to a company for a specific role, which is, I think, really challenging for a lot of quote unquote generalists, my background is very diverse in terms of the avenues that I've kind of put time into. And if you haven't become an absolute savage in one thing over the first 5 years of career, it sometimes becomes challenging to become placed in roles at different companies. And so instead of trying to be placed in roles, I just found people I wanted to work with and then built out my own role. So CoinCentral was really cool. We built out a pretty good product and launched it directly when crypto crashed. And so it died almost like within 2 weeks. We killed it. And that's actually something. It's actually something I really appreciate about working with that crew, because they lost a significant amount of money. And instead of being tilted or being frustrated, they were like, hey, we built this thing. It didn't work. Let's move on to the next. That's one of the, I think, really positive aspects of when you get to the top of poker. Instead of evaluating decisions and the processes that you built emotionally, you actually evaluate them from what they were. Being able to go through probably the biggest dollar failure of my career, because it was my product that we launched. Like I built it, designed it, hired the team, launched it, kind of a thing. To be able to do that with a group of people that there was literally zero blame on any calls. It's like, hey, you did a pretty good job. These are a couple things we could have done better. It didn't work. Move on. And then they literally just hired me again within a couple months. I love that. And that's actually something that I look for in partners that I'm working with currently. You can become emotional in a positive way, like building people up, bringing stoke, but not bringing that results-oriented mentality into the workplace. I had this conversation with the ex-COO of Toptal, currently runs Mechanism Ventures. His name is Brendan, incredibly intelligent human. We were at dinner one time and we were discussing the merits of results-oriented analytics versus process-oriented analytics. Because at Toptal, one of the things that tilted the absolute hell out of me was that every week, on a weekly basis, they look at everything in their growth funnel, be like, okay, where are the failures? Where are our fires? And they would create
just a weak sample.
Yeah, over a week sample size. And I'd be like, yo, it's like, yeah, there's variance. Like this, we're running on a probabilistic timeline. Like this is not.
I can't even tell you how many times I've gotten in trouble for that exact line of thinking where poker fails you in business is because everybody's results-oriented thinking. So. Yeah.
And it was a good conversation because he made his points, which were that we actually had they had found pretty glaring leaks in these meetings, and so that is a positive. But from my perspective, it could have been reframed as this is just like a weekly checkup, not a weekly firefighting session where we dropped X amount in growth. Right? It's like whether or not you go up or down, you do an audit is I think a better way of evaluating of communicating out that business process. Versus like, oh shit, we dropped 4% or like whatever, 14% in leads this week on SEO. What's going on wrong with SEO? It's like, well, but like that's well within like the first 2 standard deviations. Like 95% of the time that's going to happen, kind of a thing.
Root cause analysis. Is this systemic or is this just because math just works that way?
Yeah.
Like there are so many times, just being candid, things would be like, they would just be just normal variation to how traffic works. And I would be like, not sad about it at all. And a lot of people took that like offensively or like didn't think I cared. And I was like, no, wait, I'm not trying to overreact. I just want to act on things that I think that I can actually sort of control. And what are the root causes of that problem? And it didn't always work the way that I expected it to.
It's one of those lessons that's actually an empathy. That's one of the things that Rocket Fuel really taught me. So the first like 5 months at Rocket Fuel, I was a campaign analyst, which is a very different life. That means I'm interacting with clients, managing programmatic ad campaigns. It was fascinating because there'd be very, very, very standard variance, like not even massive variance, but just like plus or minus 3% of variance kind of a thing. And then the client would call and be like, hey, why did we go down 3% this week? And so I had to learn how to communicate these fundamental statistical principles to people that might not have that same background. And so nowadays, instead of being like, how could you ever possibly not know this? I kind of assume that people don't have the background in probability and then approach it from that perspective of like, hey, it makes sense. Yeah, it's not doing as well. This is how the system is set up. Now, how can we transition that into you understanding how to become successful? It's like, these are the things we can control. This is why we can control them. And this is what we can't control. When you can kind of create that line of communication, even if they don't have the same background as you, no matter, like I use this in my teaching, in my work, when I'm mentoring people, when I'm managing up or down, it doesn't really matter the context, right? Having the perspective of meeting that person where they are is probably one of my biggest skills, and one of the biggest skills you can learn in being an effective human, not only like a business person, but effective human.
100%. Yeah. Those soft skills, like we were saying before we even started, those are the things that separate the elite people that are in like the hard to get gigs at the best companies. They ask great questions. They don't necessarily take offense to people not understanding what is in their mind that the other person might not understand. And so like, if you can step back from kind of like what your perspective is and say, how is this person thinking? Like a lot of the bosses that I've worked for, their butt is on the line for those numbers. And so if there isn't a good explanation, it doesn't matter what your variance is or like what the deviation is. Like if it's 10% and you're 3% down, they don't care. They just want to know why it's down 3%. All right. So then you did some cool stuff. You were a CEO at BH Technologies in Vegas. I don't know too much about what that is, but you also, had some time there. And then you also went to Upswing.
BH Technologies was a high frequency trading crypto hedge fund that I helped co-found. I left that about a year and a half ago. They're still operating and crushing. I was pretty much there for the initial planning phase, which means building out the data infrastructure, doing the hiring. We had a lead data scientist, a CEO, and a COO. So it was about a 5-person team. I think it's around 8. It's operating really well. So they pretty much just brought me on for my background in data architecture and data science, not from an executionary perspective, but how to build the infrastructure out for it. And then I transitioned away once I wasn't really needed anymore.
Very nice. Yeah, we had Brian Ta, who's a growth PM at Coinbase, on in the previous episode. Really cool guy. Had some fascinating ideas about, about organic growth and stuff like that. I'll have to send you the link.
Actually, no, I watched part of that. It's Very intelligent human.
Oh, he's awesome. Yeah.
He knows what's going on for sure. I can tell.
Yep. Yeah, he puts himself down all the time, but Brian's a legend. So then he, you went over to Upswing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but are you a partner there, or like, are you just an employee there? Like, what is your role at Upswing?
I'm a lead coach, so I'm 1099 at Upswing. But cool. I act as their lead for so I'm a subject matter expert in a specific game, and I'm their lead coach for that game. And
now you're doing executive coaching at your own company, Weisman Consulting Group. And, it's amazing. We were looking at all these different things you've done. And tell me a little bit more about Weisman Consulting Group, because I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah. I have, as I said, I've been teaching since I was 12. And I've been coaching now professionally for 3 years. Started in doing poker coaching at a high level, and once I felt like I was good enough to actually start coaching to a high level, I started doing it. And then the same thing has been true for executive coaching, where my main clients currently are upper middle management. Actually, is like kind of my bread and butter right now, and then trying to transition into different roles, seeing on whatever makes the most sense. The pretty much the focus of this is performance coaching. So being able to help leaders effectively navigate themselves within the context of a normally very rapidly growing company. And there's a lot that goes into that. I'm sure as you're aware of it, right? And what becomes challenging is that a lot of individuals have trouble viewing themselves in the scope of, like, it's not necessarily a product, but as something that needs to be optimized from a process perspective, right? You need to be able to effectively navigate your days from a health perspective, from a mental health perspective, from a relationship navigation perspective, all of those on your own, and then bring those into your professional life. And these are kind of the things that you absolutely need to compete at the highest levels in poker. Like, I would not be where I am today, being able to literally play the highest stakes that are available in poker, if I hadn't put an absolute ton of work into my mental and emotional health. Because in order to withstand 6-figure swings on a monthly, weekly basis, you have to have a lot of processes in place in order to keep your body stable. And that same skill set transitions over directly to people who are trying to perform at a high level in the corporate structure, or maybe not corporate structure, but in the general business structure. And so I really enjoy working with individuals who are motivated and not only looking to change from the perspective of making themselves better, but wanting to make the system around them better as well. Because that's how I built myself up. And so being able to communicate the processes that I've created for myself, and then not just copy and paste them over, but learn what somebody needs and be able to design something to optimize for their specific life. I just get stoked on it. It's really, it's problem solving a human and then building a process based off of it. And that's all the things that I've ever loved in my entire life. Plus, bringing that into business, right? Because it's going to be different working with a sales director versus working with like a VP of engineering. They're completely different humans, and they're going to have different people that they have to manage up or down to. They're going to have different systems that they have to interact in. And so having my pretty diverse background in roles within a classical tech structure has helped me kind of create these empathy points in terms of what people are worrying about or what they need to optimize for within their roles at a company.
You know this a lot more than me. I never got to the levels that you got in poker, but when you're in a hyper competitive environment, those little things, they compound quite a bit, right? So if you're not healthy, you're not, taking time to reinvest in yourself and your thinking and your relationships and all the things that you do that produce the quality of your life, like all those things are processes. I myself have got fallen into these traps where, like, I get so, into what I'm doing and I don't want to do anything else. It's like the same exact thing from poker, just resurfacing in this. You have to tell yourself that it isn't necessarily always about the amount of hours you work. It's about the quality of the work that you do. And I'm sure that you have probably experienced that, because it's not like high stakes games run every single day. And when they do, you better be performing at your best, because you never know when it's going to happen again, right? And same thing with business, right?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. So we're in the middle of one of those sprints right now for poker, because so for those of you that are unaware, poker generally, if you're playing at the lower stakes games at the entry levels, you're going to be able to just show up and play whenever you want. But as you kind of go up in the tiers in poker, the availability of action, which means being able to actually sit down and play hands of poker, becomes more and more sparse, because there are less people that have the availability of funds to be able to play in the games that you want to play in. What happens is there's a lot of seasonality in terms of the availability of games. And right now we're in the middle of one of those heavy seasonality trendings because there's something called the World Series of Poker Online. So there are people that will transition to different places in the US to be able to play online. Whereas normally if my hourly rate on average is probably like $250 to $300 an hour in the low stakes games, and the games I'm playing now, it's over $1,000 plus, literally. You're not forced, but you need to be able to build your life in such a way where you're accounting for the fact that these games, like you can project out and know that for the month of July, I knew that I would have to be working 8 to 12 hours a day. And so I built that into my life where right before July, I went into Yellowstone and Tetons with some really good friends, got into nature. I have a break planned in the middle of this one where I'm going to Santa Barbara next weekend to hang out with some friends.
Good for you.
And so instead of just grinding my face off for 4 weeks straight, which I did last year and put myself in a 4-month long migraine, literally, because I just grinded every day for like 14 hours and hurt myself. What's more important is to be able to be sustainable through this, because this is actually something that high-level streamers have to learn as well, because if you're streaming to 20,000 people, you're making thousands of dollars an hour sometimes. It becomes a trade-off in terms of your time, in terms of like streaming another hour is worth $2,000, but is that actually healthy for you in the long run? What is the utility of that $2,000 versus maybe not having a migraine or maybe not getting sick? I had a conversation with my therapist about this a couple weeks ago where we were literally trying to justify the utility of me playing past a certain time at night, given the probability of me getting a migraine, therefore not being able to play over X amount of hours. And if you're not thinking about yourself in this way, where you're not a machine, but you can think of yourself as a machine with input and outputs that you can optimize towards. If you're not doing so and you're being unrealistic with what you need in order to be successful, the probability of burnout is 100%. And I've done that multiple times in my career and have learned from it, so that when we are now in these crunch periods of pretty intense seasonality where you're in a sprint for an entire month, I actually can navigate it effectively. And because also remember, during these times, I'm also taking monetary swings that are probably 5 to 10x what my normal monetary swings are. So not only does the hour count go up, but the amount of variability goes up as well. You have to show up to these time periods really well put together in order to maximize your hourly rate, but then also be able to not burn out. And that's a very tricky thing to balance.
The thing you just said was really interesting, which is like, hey, it's really difficult for poker players to enter the high stakes realm. They've got to travel to this and that. Like, I think poker has like a major funnel problem. Like if you're thinking about it from a growth perspective, it's like you have to go really like far and wide to play poker and to like play at these stakes. So like, do you feel like you put a lot more pressure on yourself given the current dynamic of the game and kind of like how the player pools are kind of are shaking out these days? Or like, do you feel like that the stuff that you're thinking about right now about prep outside the game is actually even more important than it normally would be when the game is maybe flush with tons of players?
100% the latter, where I think that the out of game optimization is even more important given the current infrastructure. Actually, before I even talk about that, I think the first thing that a lot of poker players deal with that's challenging is that they don't have diversification in their life. It's kind of what you talked about before. You're hyper focusing on one specific thing. You get very good at it. Like it takes away from your health and your friendships and your relationships and all these other things. Whereas now, if you actually look at the top performers in the game, like the Jason Koons, for example, buff as all hell, very stable, balanced life, health-wise, physically, mentally, emotionally, right? The people who are performing at the top levels, they understand that that they have to optimize themselves and that they have to create these systems in order to be sustainable. Because if you don't have that diversification in your life, you're going to burn. It's like quants or stock traders that
100%.
Work on Wall Street. The people, they burn out real fast, real quick. It's a life where you make a lot of money very quickly, and then you build a lot of trauma in your body that you have to unwind for like multiple decades afterwards. The thing that's actually helped me is that poker is not my only source of income. So I have actively taken a hit to my hourly rate, to my earning potential, in order to diversify away from playing 50 hours a week. I probably only play about 25 hours a week on average, and then 25 to 30 hours a week on average, and then anywhere from like 5 to 20 hours on my work outside of poker, which includes product development, coaching, doing the executive coaching as well. And having that diversification, even if it lowers my overall earning potential, makes me infinitely more sustainable, because now I'm not relying on poker as my main source of income. And so I don't have to, you don't get that caveman response of your resources getting like taken away from you when you're on a massive downswing, which is what a lot of poker players deal with. Because a lot of the times for poker players as well, their self-worth comes from the fact that they've gotten very good at this one thing. And so when there's something, yeah, and this happens a lot in tech as well. I see this a lot with high functioning executives where they put so much of their self-worth in the fact that they're high performers and that they do a good job and they've always done well. And you can't, there's a lot of things that aren't in your control when it comes to poker and when it comes to operating at a high level within the tech world or the business world generally. How you create the system outside of your job directly correlates to how well you're going to be able to navigate times of negative variance or when you're getting unlucky very consistently, which happens all the time. And that diversification, it's the same thing. And it's like a very basic modern portfolio theory thing. Even if you are diversifying in ways that have a lot of variance, like I'm diversifying into playing poker, right? And doing like crypto investing and things like that. But it's, even though they're high variance things, just having that larger amount of count of things I'm diversifying lowers the overall variance of my quote unquote portfolio of my life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the fundamentals of what you're saying right now are the same fundamentals that if you want to be elite at anything you want to do in life. And like, you know, like as time goes on, human beings just get more sample, they get more data, they get to study different ways people live. And it turns out that the fundamentals of things you're talking about apply to business, they apply to everything in your life. And so if you want to be really good at something, you have to treat yourself well, invest in yourself, and make sure that you are performing well. Because I think this is a great segue, because one of the questions I get all the time is like, what is the current state of poker? And I think some people are probably listening to this and going, what the hell are you talking about? Why do you have to be such an animal with training and studying all this stuff? Because I don't think people quite understand like what the current state of poker is. Because when I first got in, this was the Wild West. It was like absolute pandemonium. People had no idea what they were doing. Nobody studied. There was no math behind it. It was just like, we're going to the streets, you and I, and somebody's going to come out and win this hand. And like, then over time, the games got really tough and I was putting in as much energy as I possibly could. It became pretty clear to me that I was a good poker player, but not an elite poker player. And I had to be very careful about what games I played, who I played against, and understand myself as to what my limitations were. And that still applies in business. For most people who are listening are just growth nerds like both of us are. Like, explain the current state of poker and game theory and like how software and analytics has really changed the game, because it's, to me, it's fascinating. It's really, really fascinating what's been happening in the industry.
Totally. I think the best way to do this would be just give a little bit of a history lesson in terms of how poker has kind of moved from one place to the other. So pretty much pre-2003, 2003 was a very pivotal year in poker. The game of poker was played primarily live. This was right before the big internet boom of online poker. And you didn't have a lot of shared information when it came to training. Everyone was learning on their own. The people that were the best, maybe they had like one or two friends, and then they all became the best together because they actually had someone to communicate with and talk strategy with. And then in 2003, a man named Chris Moneymaker, who I'm funnily enough coaching tomorrow on his Twitch stream.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be very silly.
He's a really nice guy. I met him at Fox's a couple times.
Good human. It's very much going to be an old school versus new school kind of a pairing. His name is literally Chris Moneymaker. You could not have a better branding for the poker boom ever. It's insane the amount of serendipity that came into that, right? Who was an amateur who won a satellite, which means that a $10,000 buy-in tournament, you win a smaller tournament that you maybe entered for $100 to get into that $10,000 tournament. And then you win the $10,000 tournament, you win $2.5 million. After that, online poker really took off in the United States. And what happened with online poker was that it brought a lot of people. I was literally 13 when this happened, and I started playing online when I was 13 years old. And I joined 2+2, which is an old forum where people would actually talk strategy. It brought the game of poker from this isolated environment into a place where there's a lot of shared information. And this shared information became more and more ubiquitous until I'd say about in 2014 was when there started to be a really big tipping point, because that's when machine learning started to become a lot more available and when it actually started to getting applied to the game of poker. If you look up Lebradas, I believe it is, I think that was the Carnegie Mellon team were the ones that did Lebradas. They actually built a bot that was able to beat the best heads up no limit, which is a very specific form of poker, which has a smaller game tree than other forms. So that's very important. But they were able to build a bot that could beat the best players in the world who ended up being my friends. It's very similar to AlphaGo, right? Where we thought that poker was very much one of those forbidden or holy grails of being able to beat humans, because for a game like Go, that is a deterministic game, which means that there's no probability that exists inside of it. You can literally see everything that's happening. in terms of the game tree. But it's a really, really difficult computing problem because there's billions and billions of permutations that you kind of have to sift through. And in poker, it's actually even more challenging because it's stochastic. It's a game of incomplete information. And so it'd be very similar to actually the type of machine learning that we're doing for self-driving cars, because you have to probabilistically determine what's happening in different situations.
Yep, so many variables.
Yeah, exactly. It's effectively called the fog of war. Let's say that you're a commander on a battlefield and your opposition can be in 5 different places. You don't know where that is, but you probabilistically can figure out where they're most likely to be given all the data that you have. It's really challenging to build models for that kind of problem. It's just very, very difficult. And poker has gotten to the point now where the best players in the world, they're all using solving software. You have a program that's been built. The main one's called Munker Solver. There's a bunch of them out there where you actually can input a specific hand and get a Nash equilibrium output. So you get the perfect solution. If like one computer is playing against one computer, it'll give you the answer.
Used to be a debate. Now we know the concrete answer.
It makes making poker content very not difficult, but it's a different game now. You used to be able to make poker content and just kind of talk out of your butt. Nowadays, if you're putting something out publicly, you better run it through the solver, and you better make sure that you have a very specific reason why you're teaching what you're teaching. You don't want to give away misinformation. That used to be a really big issue in the poker world, and I think in coaching generally, but it's not as much of a thing anymore. And that's actually a good way to talk about the general poker ecosystem, because there are different tiers. If you're a brand new poker player, you don't really need to worry about what I'm saying right now. You can show up, have fun, learn the rules with your friends, just enjoy the game. And as you start to kind of move up the ranks, what you start to see is that even if the players aren't using these quote unquote GTO outputs or whatever, the general population is just getting a little bit better by proxy, because they do a lot of parroting. So I do streaming on Twitch, and I try very hard to communicate what my thought process is while I'm going through hands, but that doesn't mean that everyone's going to get it. What they can do is say, in this specific scenario, Dylan did this, so in a similar scenario, I'm also going to do the same thing. And so even if the general population doesn't know why they're doing something, by definition, they're going to be getting closer to game theory optimal, because the best players are putting what the correct solutions are into the ecosystem. That directly translates into poker coaching, where there's a very big issue in the poker coaching ecosystem. And this is a product debate that we can have if you want. But because I put a lot of time and effort, I've built multiple products for poker specifically. And one of the main leaks that I saw within the ecosystem when it came to poker training products is that introductory content was being built in such a way that didn't help people transition effectively. It taught them what to do, but not the basic fundamentals of the game. It's very, very challenging to communicate the basic fundamentals of an incredibly complex game and then be able to apply it in a beginner setting. And so that's my most recent product that I built out, was literally made as you can call it a lead magnet for poker, where it's a $99 product. Literally anyone can buy it. I assume you know no information. And then it just teaches you the basic fundamentals of poker, but from a game theory perspective, so that everybody, when they're starting off from the beginning of their poker journey, they can actually start thinking with the correct axioms. And that's one of the biggest issues in poker, and always has been, is that you're in the middle of a hand and you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. And so being able to solve for that why is a newer advent in poker, generally speaking. And then I have a secondary course, which is my advanced course, where literally I built it with one of the best poker players on the planet. He was my coach. And we literally built a perfectly solved strategy for you for like 90% of the game tree. So and we've had people who have just learned what we put out and started making 6 figures a month, literally, just like copying and like learning why we were doing what we were doing and then implementing these strategies. Not everyone can do that. I'm saying it as if it's easy, but this is somebody who had like a decade of experience and was now learning GTO from this course.
I'll drop links to both those things in case anybody, because I actually have a lot of business people who, when I talk about poker, and they're like, every time I like talk to somebody, like, oh, you played poker, and it's such a conversation starter. You get to learn more about people than you would think. And there were like 2 phases in my poker evolution. There was the first one, which was like, I went to Borders and realized that my friends were kicking my butt in college, and why were they always winning all the time? And that was interesting because I understood that there was a system to this, but I just didn't understand what that system was. So that was V1. You'd start to play, you'd go on 2+2, you'd figure some stuff out. You would be like a break-even plus a little bit of a better break-even player. And I was playing a lot of the mixed games, limit games at Foxwoods and stuff like that, and online and everything like that. Then I found Matthew Janet's book, Applications of Nolan Hold'em. And I basically was like, okay, it makes a lot of sense as to why I'm not able to beat some of these games online and why I feel like I used to have a significant edge and now I'm not so sure when I play against people who are a little bit better than me. I just didn't know what that was or how to frame the problem. So I actually stopped playing for about a year and literally just retaught myself, like from a theory perspective, like what are the fundamentals of how this game works? That was the best thing I ever did. And I don't play like full time or like even very seriously anymore. Like I'll play the PLO at Encore and stuff like that on the weekends when the game is good. But I feel so much like more able to solve the particular problems that I'm in because they range so much. It's like business, like a lot of the privacy stuff that's going on with like Google Analytics and like all this other, it's like, that data might go away, and it's going to be like 2003 poker again.
It's gonna be the fact that like it's like we don't have cookies anymore. It's like that's going to destroy all of all programmatic advertising. Like literally every single vendor has to rewrite all of their models if they don't have the ability to pull cookie data from something. It's fascinating. It'll be very interesting.
And like the other thing too is like the fact that like poker was less about like you're born with the skill or like you just got to play a ton of hours, and it was more like that changed the game I think a lot because then it was like there were players that I was playing against that just learned from the ground up the fundamentals of theory and how to like play perfectly. And it's an interesting time in poker because there's this kind of like you need players who don't get completely just wrecked at the tables. Like you have to have environments where players are comfortable and they're able to like not just completely get taken advantage of. But there's also like a very predatory nature of poker these days where like we could go on, I'm sure.
I'll talk to that very quickly actually, because it's something that I've had this debate a lot with people in poker. Real talk, the people that are salty are lazy. There are people that have been playing poker this is their career. They've been playing it for multiple decades. And they don't want to put in the work to get that much better. And so when the overall community, including the recreational players, are getting better and they're not getting better, it's not going to feel good because it really inflames that caveman response of your resources being taken away. Like you're scared you're going to lose your job kind of a thing. Instead of putting in the work, they get salty. And that's a general human response that a lot of people go through. But I kind of what you're saying, it is more sustainable from an ecosystem perspective if the people who are being introduced to the game are doing so with a general vocabulary that'll actually allow them to stay around for a long time. If you teach someone poker, it doesn't mean they're going to become a crusher. It means that they're going to be able to show up and not have a negative 85% win rate, let's say, right? Like that's why slot machines are programmed at losing at 49% and not at at 30% or something like that. It's so you can get the feedback loop where you're actually having a process. And if you're playing poker and you just get smoked every single time, you're not going to come back. There's this duality between people who want to keep things how they are or how they were and kind of fighting this newer wave. But the newer wave is more sustainable. There's going to be a lot of fat that gets trimmed while it's happening. The reason why I really transitioned back into poker full time was because I met this friend, Chris, who showed me about Munker Solver because I didn't know that we were I knew that the tools existed for being able to use solve solutions, but I didn't know that it actually was publicly available in the way that it was. Having the background that I'd had in my this is kind of one of the things where people will ask me, how is my career helped poker? It's like, well, I literally started my career in machine learning. And when I saw that a lot of those same principles are now being brought into poker, and that the best players in the world were using it, my brain was like, of course, that makes perfect sense. Like, if we have computers giving us the answers and we have the ability to study those frameworks, you probably want to do that, or else you're not going to be able to compete at the highest levels. And so the availability of this information was really what kicked me back into gear and transitioning back into poker. And that I'm just very fortunate for that because
do you feel reinvigorated?
Totally. Yeah, totally. Because it also allowed me to transition into coaching and being able to have that be a part of my poker journey. I always had an issue with poker coaching because even if someone was really intelligent and like the Phil Galfons of the world, who are always the best during their time and really good communicators, amazing human, really, really kind person. Like for the people like that, there's maybe 3 or 4 of the Phil Galfons in the world for the hundreds of people that were bad. And I never wanted to be one of those coaches where I was just kind of spewing what I thought was correct without knowing the right answer. Like, because we have these answers, you can actually build out curriculums for people. Like it'd be like trying to teach math without proving everything from the ground up. That's what we were doing before. I don't know if you ever took any analysis courses, but literally the way that you create calculus is from the definition of a point and a line. It's like, this is a point, this is a point, this is a line. You build calculus from that, literally. And that's what we're able to do now in poker. that to me is really like, that's a lot of that reinvigoration of my career has come from that construct becoming more ubiquitous.
Yeah, I mean, I love like the idea that you just mentioned before, which is you put out this course that's kind of like a league magnet. It's like when you're playing in a live setting and you don't have the software in front of you, like you can't just memorize what you're supposed to do in every single situation. It's like you have to have a fundamental understanding of what to do in certain situations, when to do. Like the amount of passion that I have for understanding this game is sort of infinite, because there are solutions to every scenario, and you will never, as a human being, be able to remember all those different scenarios. And the same thing goes for business.
Oh yeah,
like there are oftentimes multiple ways to potentially solve the specific problem. And the people I admire the most are the people who are thinking in fundamentals first, not what the actual outcome is. They're saying, "Hey, here's what I think it is. Here's why. If we're wrong, here's why it could be." And I think that's like what actually also leaks out in like your coaching as well, is like it's not just about what's the answer. And a lot of those coaches have kind of gone, right? Because you can't justify charging someone for something when anybody can say what the answer is. I'll just give you one more question. What do you think the future of the poker environment is? Like, where do you see the game going? I know we didn't necessarily like prep for this, but like,
yeah, totally. You're
in this more than I am, and I'm a passionate like fan / person who still plays at a relatively like competitive level. Mm-hmm. Where do you see the game going? Because you're in it every day. There was a time where we were all thinking that maybe the games world would tie into poker, and that would kind of like increase it. Now we see some chess players coming over. Do you see that sort of evolving, poker sort of evolving, or is it going to always be the game it is today? Like, do you see that the online games world maybe having an impact on that? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think there's going to be a pretty stark split. There's going to be a heavy shift into live poker. One of the biggest reasons why online poker specifically is going to change is the advent of real-time solvers, which means that you actually can get the perfect solution in real time. This is a very complicated problem for my dev friends out there. If you want to like hit me up on it, I've actually thought about it a decent amount, like in terms of how to build out the infrastructure for a real-time solver. It's really challenging to do, and it's starting to become completed, where we're kind of caching some of these solutions to the game tree that show up the most frequently in such a way where it's generalized that you can actually in real time get the perfect solution. And if you have the ability to do that, it's like playing against a chess bot. You're not going to win as a human. Some bots can't beat humans still, but there are some bots that can beat a lot of humans now. And that's becoming more ubiquitous within the online poker world. And operators are doing a lot of really smart things in terms of changing the constructs for which they present the game of poker. The models that these bots are using are actually not efficient within these new constructs. So it's always a kind of cat and mouse game. It's very interesting. It reminds me, one of my main projects at Rocket Fuel, I was the main analyst to the team that was helping to find bots or bot farms in the programmatic advertising space. We built predictive algorithms to try to figure out which of the exchanges had a higher probability of being bot infested. For example, if you have an exchange with an average 8% CTR across the entire exchange, that exchange probably has bots on it. It's like it's pretty obvious, right? Like and so there are those basic indicators that you can look for. The more intelligent bot creators were able to mask that, right? Because it's very much a cat and a mouse game. And that, I think, is what's going to happen within the online poker world specifically, where you're going to have these people that have built out these real-time solving bots that are running as dApps. And the operators are going to be trying to find these bots, punish these bots, create constructs where the bots don't work. And so online poker is going to look very, very different 10 years from now, because by definition, it can't be the same. And I don't know how that'll transition into the gaming infrastructure that you were describing. A couple of my friends just put on this 25K heads up, I think it was Poker King tournament, where they had people like Hafu and Botez, two very...
Yeah, I saw that. Yep.
Very prominent Twitch streamers who are intelligent badasses in their own right. And they brought them into the poker environment, which I think is very smart. You're going to get a lot of crossover, I think, from the general public. Even me, who's not like, I'll get anywhere from 200 to 500 people watching me on Twitch, which is a lot relative to the general population, but not a lot relative to the biggest streamers on Twitch.
Sure, yeah.
Like I can beat the Twitch poker lobby, but I can't beat the like League of Legends lobby kind of a thing. That's if you want to have that conversation, that actually is a fascinating one. How to optimize against Twitch. We can have that one after this if you want.
I'm so down.
Yeah, because I think your growth friends will like that.
Yep.
The bigger issue is how online poker will exist as a product offering. I just know for a fact that it's going to look different, but I can't predict how that permutation of the cat and mouse game is going to evolve over time.
Right.
And
it's
then,
like consumer confidence coming out of COVID. Same thing maybe with poker. It's like some people have probably gotten pretty beat up over the years, and maybe they will come back. Maybe some of them won't. But we definitely need more acquisition of net new players to sustain the environments, irrespective of whatever happens with the bots.
Totally, and that's where the diversification into gamifying really works out.
Right.
And I think what's going to see the most positive is live poker by far, because people, one, I think in a digital world where everyone's job is on a computer, whereas in the past we might have wanted to use our computer as an escape, now we want to escape from a screen. So I think the World Poker Tour just had their biggest tournament, 5K ever, and coming out of COVID. And so I think you're going to see a massive boom in live poker. And live poker is going to be around for a long time because it's harder to solve for. The people aren't playing perfectly, and so the solved solutions, they work if you're a perfect robot, but you have to kind of...
You work really hard.
Yeah.
You can still beat those games very easily.
Oh, I mean, very, very, very easily. But even at literally, I would play the biggest games that are available live. I'd have to sell... So for those of you that aren't aware, I don't... for example, if I wanted to play a $100,000 buy-in, I could go play it, but I wouldn't have enough of a bankroll to be able to support myself. So what you would do is you'd sell action. So if I was playing a 100K buy-in, I'd probably have to sell 85% of that. I'd have to find investors to buy $85,000 of it. And it would happen in a heartbeat. It would be very easy to be able to sell that amount, because they're
equivalent to if you had 10K to spend on Facebook ads, and you're like, you know what, let's just bomb it. Let's see what happens in this first month.
Yeah, exactly. But it's much easier to bomb if you know that the person that's running your campaign knows what's up and is telling you that it's a good spot, right? That's exactly it. It's a fascinating ecosystem, and it always has been. And what's the most fascinating about it is just how soft it is from a business perspective. So, for example, I took everything I learned from tech and then brought it to product development in poker. And I was like, holy crap, everyone is bad.
I wanted to talk to you about this because I feel like the industry itself, if you look at it just from, when I was a customer and I was in poker, I was like, wow, this is great. But now as a little bit more older person, I'm like, wait a second. I'm like, these guys don't even understand. Like Doug was so super successful because he understood virality, content, and took advantage of that industry. And it's like, guys, you do realize that it's working, right? And so there's probably some learnings there on what you can do.
Dude, at Upswing, I can't give away all of our secret sauce. The dudes will get mad at me. But there are some things that we see for our main competitors where we're just like, are you kidding? This is there are people that still aren't building out marketing funnels. Some people are starting to get there in terms of really optimizing for Twitch, which we'll talk about in a little bit. If I were to talk to someone about building a programmatic campaign out for them, their brains would explode. It's just not a construct that makes sense. And that's very, very true from the product side as well. If you were to talk to someone about building out a learning management system that has the appropriate UX that's actually optimized for the consumer base that you're trying to build out products for, those words wouldn't even register that I just said out loud. Whereas everyone on this podcast that's in the tech space, yeah, of course, that's what you do.
Standard.
Yeah, that's literally what else do you do? I don't know how else you would make this thing. And the answer is with a bunch of duct tape, and it doesn't work out very well.
Yep.
And so when you are very product focused, having a growth focused product development where you're building products based off of based off the research that you see from the users that you're trying to interact with, where you really do that. You do an understanding of the ecosystem, build out key buyer profiles, make sure that your products are hitting all their pain points, and you're building out the product so that you can actually advertise it effectively. That construct it prints so much money in poker because no one's doing it. And when you're the main player, and that's why it's really fun working with Upswing, is because they were already the incumbents in the space. And when I came onto them and working with them, they already were doing really well because those dudes had figured out a lot of stuff. And then I had some stuff that they hadn't figured out yet because of my background in tech. And so it was a very awesome partnership. Literally the day I met Doug, I was working for Toptal at his house, and I was there with another one of my friends, and they were in the middle of Doug's viral journey, and they were having some conversation about programmatic that they didn't really know what they were talking about. So I came in and described it to them, and they looked at me, they're like, where did you come from? I'm like, this is basic, dude. This is if you talk to any sort of somebody in growth, they're going to know what I'm talking about. And this is for the people who are the incumbents in the space. And not only are they still the incumbents, but they're just by far still doing the best job.
It's important to have people that balance your strengths with your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best company builders are really good at that. My buddy Chris Walker is CEO of Refine Labs, which is a demand gen agency, and he's based in Boston. he's out on LinkedIn putting out content, and the amount of traction that he's getting out there, and the amount of like if you looked at his Google Analytics account, you're like, wow, the amount of direct organic that people are just searching for his brand just because of the viral content he's doing that costs him literally $0.
Yeah.
But the attribution models that you build for your business, turns out, don't actually understand that very well. So that creates an opportunity.
Dude, that was one of the biggest pains I ever had to deal with, was that I became a subject matter expert for attribution for a little bit of time, because it's a really, really, really challenging problem. I'm sure all of you are aware, especially when it comes to things like multi-touch attribution and trying to figure out probabilistically different touch points, and understanding organic reach, and knowing what part of the buyer journey that organic reach comes in, how much you're supposed to weight that. It really does create a gap, because it's just hard to track. I really appreciate that perspective that you're saying, where it creates this opportunity in the ecosystem, because we can't track it that well. It also creates the ability for people to just overprice themselves. Like, it's such an inefficient market still. The social and then organic generally are just super inefficient, where the biggest winners in this space are absolutely slaughtering and can charge whatever they want for, like, in terms of CPMs, because they're just doing really, really well. But we don't have
CACs, average cost to acquire over the past few years. It's like through the roof. You know what I mean?
That's crazy.
And I had Rand Fishkin on, who's the founder of SparkToro and Mars previously. And, he's building a product to help you put a process around finding the right podcast, finding the right social channels and stuff. And it's like, God, like years ago, we were talking about building brand, and then everybody forgot. And we got these like eloquent models, and we were doing PPC, and then we were like, wait a second. It turns out that the highest converting channel and the lowest cost is when people actually know who you are.
Oh yeah.
So, you know what I mean? Like, it's not that difficult of a thing, but it just, we lost ourselves for a bit,
So it's not a difficult thing in terms of understanding. It's a very, very difficult thing to do well. Yeah, that's and that actually is I think my favorite part of the process that I've gone through with Upswing specifically is I literally productize myself and turn myself into a brand.
You have to.
Yeah,
you have to.
It's something I never thought I would do. Like, my entire career, I was the product analytics dude in the back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, well, now actually, because you're the person who's making these products, you need to be in the front and center. And so going through the process of building yourself into not only a brand, but a brand that you want to represent you, right? In terms of its efficiency as a brand from a product perspective, but also just in terms of making sure that it highlights who you are as a human. That journey has been intense, for lack of a better terminology. And talking to someone like Doug, I'm saying his name, Doug Polk, if you look him up, probably the most famous poker player currently. Or at least he was. Maybe he still is. I don't know. But
bang, bang.
I don't care if he was incredibly systematic in the way that he built out his brand. And it burnt him out. Because in order to win the YouTube game, or to win the Twitch game, or to win the Instagram game, it is a game of consistency. And like you need to create touch points constantly for people.
Oh my God. If you don't log into Twitter for a week, all of a sudden your engagement just falls off. It's like, God, can I just take a break?
Yeah. The most sadistic version of this is Twitch, I think. Twitch and YouTube are probably the top two. Maybe even more Twitch more so from a consistency perspective than YouTube. You literally, if you wanted to win Twitch, and thankfully I don't have to do this because I don't Twitch isn't my way of making money. Twitch is a channel, which is something that I optimize against. But for those people who make Twitch their entire lives, you have to sign up 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. You sit in front of a computer and you turn yourself into a television show that people that people can build into their lives and build into their routines. And that is an amount of accountability that literally, like, the people behind Twitch are genius in the way it's designed, and also a little bit sadistic in the way that, no, real talk. Like, it's not, I don't think it's sustainable for the content creators, because when you drop off hard.
Yeah, the penalty's severe.
Yeah, it's an absolute massive severe penalty. And I'm really fortunate in that I have a boutique stream where people that want to watch me, they know they want to watch me because they're literally getting free coaching. And my Twitch streams, if I were to charge for them, I could probably charge like $1,000 a stream or something like that, just because of the amount of information that people are getting. But I give it away for free at a low frequency as a lead gen part of my funnel. But when I was building up my brand, I was streaming 5 days a week. I did a bankroll challenge where I streamed myself playing low stakes. So it was something that I wasn't giving away too much information, but I had to show up every single day in order to be competitive in the lobby. I'll give you all a couple pro tips if you want to growth hack a Twitch stream. The first thing you need to do is have a partner who you have to pay somebody to host you. at some frequency, somebody who has a consistent stream that's in a similar vertical. So for example, Upswing has multiple streamers who they sponsor on Twitch, and we would get them to host me when my Twitch stream was starting. So a lot of people, the majority of Twitch streamers, they'll never get above 5 people. I don't know what their numbers are, but it's like a very long tail in terms of the people that actually become successful. I never had an unsuccessful Twitch stream because on my second stream ever, I got 1,000-person host, and 100 of those people stayed. And then over time, as my brand became more defined and as people became aware of me in terms of as a teacher, as a content creator, and they realized they were getting free information, you have the ability with that consistency and then the inputs of outside hosting. It just creates as long as you're not bad, right? Like as long as you're putting out a good product, people are going to keep showing up. And that's by far the easiest way to growth hack Twitch. What's also really important is to understand your windows and understanding how competitive the different time frames are. So I pick a time frame for the poker directory. So each game has a different directory. And what's most important is to be in the top 8 in your directory because that's above the fold. And if you're like, there's a massive drop off from above the fold and below the fold, obviously. And so if you can get above the fold on your directory, it's going to have ridiculous return on investment. And so you're
just going to get a certain amount of that volume no matter what.
No matter what. People just clicking on, people want to watch poker. They don't know anyone in the Twitch directory. They're going to just click on somebody randomly depending on their title, their name, their branding, what game they're playing, et cetera, et cetera. You have to pick a time frame where you can be competitive in that directory. If I wanted to stream on Sunday from 8 a.m. PST to 5 p.m. PST, I'm going to get slaughtered. Because all the biggest Twitch streamers, like Lex Veldhouse, who is an absolute savage, he's done so much good work with this Twitch stream. He's literally someone you should build a case study off of. He's done such a good job. It's phenomenal. I built a lot of my strategy off of him. He gets anywhere from like 2K to 30K Twitch viewers. For those of you who are unaware, 30K is in like the point. It's like 0.00001%, like probably top 20.
But for poker, it's probably like a large majority, right?
No, for poker, he has more than the entire directory combined times 10. Or something, like sometimes, depending on the time window that he's in. And so you don't want to compete with those people. You want to compete in a time frame that you can get enough of the market share organically because it has compounding returns. It's really interesting too because we figured all this out. Like nobody, like Doug was able to do good on Twitch because like with some of these things, he gave me a couple tips. I figured out the rest. It took like 2 days to build the strategy. Not very hard, but if you look out there for people, especially in poker, nobody is approaching things from this kind of a strategy. And I think that that's probably true for a lot of these gaming communities where taking this more growth analytics mindset into the ecosystems, you're going to find a lot of very inefficient systems that you can take advantage of because a lot of these, what we take for granted processes, they just don't exist yet.
Yeah, the content game right now, like it's kind of like the new like poker for me. It's like I find it incredibly interesting. I also find it that I just like talking to people about things that I'm really passionate about, and if I can do that, and also like there's so many conversations I've had over the years with people who are at the best at their game, and I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? Why didn't I not record that and like do something with that, you know? But now that there's a lot more tools and processes in place, you know, I think that's amazing about the poker scene too, because I've always thought to myself, how hard would it be to start up like an affiliate or like some type of brand in that space? You know, there's probably a lot of opportunity there, but
yeah, I wouldn't though, because it has a cap. It's why poker is such a fascinating ecosystem, is because it has a cap by definition. There's only so many people in it. So that's like a negative, but the positive is that all of your opponents are pretty much poker players. And so those are smart people with lots of resources, right?
For sure, yeah.
Smart, lots of resources, bad executors, generally speaking. Matt Coletta, one of the co-founders of Upswing, one of his favorite things to say is like, if you hire a poker player, they literally will be by far your best employee or garbage. It's how he describes it. It's very polarizing because you get poker players who know what's up, know what they don't know what they need to learn. Jason Strasser, Donnie Stern, two of the old high school crushers, are both absolutely slaughtering finance now. Really, cool. Both of them good humans. Donnie's somebody that helped me in a really specific way in my poker career. It's not like they were able to just randomly pick up finance, like even because they were good at poker. They took all of the skills that were necessary to be a high stakes poker player, everything we talked about earlier in this podcast, and learned. It wasn't like they just figured it out. It was very much a systematic assimilation of information into themselves over time. And they were able to do that very quickly because of the skill set of getting good at poker. And if you have that viewpoint, which most of the top performers do, generally you transition really well into any sort of another discipline. Because to get to the top in poker is pretty much harder than anything else. I have a very specific memory at the beginning of my career. when I showed up to Rocket Fuel and they were teaching me how to analyze campaigns. They're like, this is how we know if something's doing well. This is what the model says. And I'm just looking at, and like, they're like, this usually takes a month to figure out. And I was looking at it, I was like, what else is there that takes a month? Like, cause this is like, because I'm comparing it to playing high stakes PLO. Cause like at the end of college, I was playing, even though I was bad at the time, I was still playing pretty big and studying and stuff like that. My brain just didn't really get it. And it's like, from a quantitative perspective, there's not a lot that's much harder than poker. What I wasn't good at that time in my poker career or in my regular career was the learning process aspect of it and all these soft skills that we've talked about before.
Yeah, I think so. Coming out of this conversation, like I already, saw a lot of the content you've done online and stuff like that. Coming out of this, I'm feeling like there's probably going to be some people who are like, hey, you know what? He thinks differently, and he's created these systems for his own growth and development and helped others. If you want to just give like a pitch for like what you're doing right today, if like somebody wants to like. Somebody heard this and said, holy crap, Dylan's really smart, which I hope that they do, because that's the reason why I wanted to have you on here. How can somebody get in touch with you if they want to learn a little bit more about maybe you can help them coach or like some of the materials you put out?
Totally. Thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or at dylanweisman.com/contact. Both are really good ways to get a hold of me. So right now, I'd say the product offerings that I have for coaching specifically are executive performance coaching. And that doesn't necessarily mean you need to be an executive at a company. It just means that we build out a framework for you to become more effective and more sustainable. Those are the two things that I really try to optimize towards in my coaching, specifically for higher level people in the tech world, is the sustainability aspect. Because a lot of people got to where they've gotten to because they're smart, intelligent, driven badasses, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to do it forever without their bodies breaking. And so that's really the main product offering that I give right now, is helping to systematize and make your kind of streamline your processes in terms of your daily basis, how to integrate self-care, therapy, mental and emotional, physical well-being into being a high-level performer, kind of in the same way that I've been describing in order to be a high-stakes poker player, just taking those same constructs and applying them to you in a customizable way. That's, I'd say, my main product offering for executive coaching right now. And what I'm also doing as well, actually on a team level, and this is what I kind of help middle managers with, is building out communication systems for teams internally. One of the most important things for me, and I'd say what's really helped me in my life, has been hardcore putting time into my communication methodologies over the past, I'd say 4 years. I'd say like the main people that I look at are Esther Perel, Brene Brown, people who
Brene's dope.
Brene's dope. Esther Perel, I love Brene. She does really good work. Esther Perel is just an absolute savage. Like, she is so good. Not just at her work, but like from a growth perspective, she's killing it. Her socials are all on point. She has amazing like lead funnels into all of her different products. She has multiple different product offerings. Like, she has executive coaching down to free podcasts, down to couples therapy. Literally what I'm doing is copying and pasting her. Like, I want to build out for myself what her model is. And I got into a lot of what I'm doing because of what I'm stoked on. And I got into her work because it was very applicable to my life. Like, she has a book called The State of Affairs, which is literally just about infidelity. And it's not like it's a book about infidelity, but it's really a book about communication and learning how to not only speak to yourself, but to the people in your life about really intense constructs and situations. And I try to bring a lot of the axioms that these badasses have kind of proven out and bring them into the corporate infrastructure. Because one of the biggest issues for me, and I'm sure that you've experienced this and almost everyone has experienced this, is that miscommunication in corporate infrastructure is rampant. And
for sure,
a lot of the reason why that's true is lack of shared vocabulary, lack of shared tools, and lack of infrastructure to be able to actually lower the probability of there being miscommunications. And so that's something that I actually have built out for one company specifically, where it was helping middle managers across teams build out communication systems to be able to better effectively work together.
Yeah, like, there was a huge jump for all these quantitative skills. Now we go through the pandemic and everybody's struggling to kind of like not only treat themselves well, like how do you do that? What are the plays you need to make? And also be a better, more effective communicator, because as we become more distributed and people are less in front of each other, like there are obvious challenges. And then when we go back, you want to be prepared and better than you were before, not just going back to the same way you were doing things all the time.
I think that is very pertinent. I love the way you described that. The one thing I want to add to that is I think that we all kind of got a big reality check for self-care. Right. We were like when you're just stuck in the grind for so long and then the grind goes away and then all of your not efficient self-care goes away also. Yeah. I personally broke during the pandemic. I said a months long migraine thing. I ended up actually going into ketamine therapy, which has been super helpful for me in terms of managing my anxiety and depression. And I just got a really intense reality check. And I think a lot of people did. And so coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot of feeling of wanting to be better and wanting to kind of take the steps to being healthier and more sustainable. But we've productized a lot of that information currently, but it hasn't really seeped into our culture in the way that it needs to. Because a lot of that, even if the correct answers are out there, it's very similar to my poker coaching, where we have the correct answers, but being able to get those answers into somebody's head and have them actually understand it and be able to synthesize it into themselves is really challenging because everybody learns differently. And it's especially challenging when it comes to learning how to take care of yourself, because the reason why we don't take care of ourselves is so built into our entire lives. And it's really hard to see where your leaks are, because if you could see them, a lot of the times you'd fix them. And there's a lot of the times even a bigger issue where you see what your leaks are, you don't fix them, and then you shame yourself for doing that. And it becomes like a vicious cycle that I think a lot of us have found ourselves in.
Yeah, I'll make an analogy. Like I got into meditation. I just so happened to stumble upon Sam Harris's book, Waking Up. And I said to myself, where has this been all my life? How did I not know about meditation? How did I not know about mindfulness? And having systems to deal with the obvious negative and other things that happen, challenges you come into in life. Had I found that earlier in life, I think to myself, I would have superpowers. The other thing to consider is that most of the great things that I've learned is through conversations like this, where there's somebody who's already gone through that process and made the mistakes and learned from it and built systems on top of it. And, in life, you don't have to figure everything out on your own. You can go talk to somebody like Dylan, create some systems to improve and enhance your life. And to me, the replacement value of that capital that I would spend on that is a cheat code for getting ahead in the other things. You know what I mean?
There's so myself and one of my partners, we hired a couples counseling coach. By far the best money I've ever spent in my entire life. Not just for my partner and I's relationship, because her and I have gotten so much better at communicating, but also because I just take all those communication constructs and apply them everywhere now. It is so effective. When you really learn the optimal answers for communication, because there are generic responses that actually are still empathetic, right? And you can build out a playbook for how you communicate with others that makes you not sound like a robot, but also allows you to communicate with almost everybody. Once you learn that, it really is a superpower, truly, because now your efficiency of information transfer is at a 95% versus at a 40% or a 50%. And I think that especially in a corporate landscape where there are so many teams stacked on top of teams, stacked on top of teams, the communication becomes obfuscated as it's a game of telephone, right? As we're creating a more decentralized infrastructure with remote work or remote optional kind of work, which is my bread and butter. I've been a remote worker for almost 7 years now, or 6 years now. It's going to become harder because we use seeing someone in face as a crutch a lot of the times. And there is a lot to be said about being in the same room with somebody. I don't take away how important that is. You definitely need FaceTime at some frequency, even for remote companies, whether that be once a quarter, once a month, I don't really know. Depends on what you're doing. The structures that you're building in that remote infrastructure is going to pay so many dividends as you scale your company. And having been inside of remote organizations that did a poor job and the remote organizations that do a good job, it's very much night and day, not just in terms of the quality of work, but in terms of the quality of life for the people that are working for that company. I saw a post recently where we really are transitioning away from perks being flashy, because in order to be a high performer, you have to have a lot of self-care. And so if you are a high performer and you have high self-care, the benefits that a lot of high-end companies need to offer should be in line with that, right? They should be in line with mental health and awareness, and results-oriented work environments, things where you allow the employee to optimize their life for themselves, create that workspace for them so that they can actually continue to be a high performer, instead of trying to pigeonhole them into a set of rules that you think is best, because that's just not how it's going to be true. That's not going to be true for everybody.
Yeah, and like, you know, from a company perspective, like the war for talent has never been so severe like it is now.
So intense, yeah.
You know, and like the replacement value of someone like who's an expert, like, you know, like yourself in poker, it's like those little edges add up a ton. So if you're saying to yourself, "Oh, that sounds fluffy," and like, they'll be fine," it's like
No.
you're not understanding what Dylan's trying to say. Like this is about like there is a way to quantify it, right? There's ways of like employee retention, productivity, et cetera. Like you can quantify that, but also like the world is changing. The way that people want to work and the way that people are thinking about using their resources is changing. I have a friend, Sarah Bedrick. I worked with her at HubSpot. She co-founded a company called Compt, and they take employee perks and they say, instead of us like dictating what you want, here's the budget. You go pick whatever it is that you want, because some people prefer to go do a meditation retreat. Some people would rather do like counseling with their partner because that enhances their life and therefore they're more productive and happy when they're working at places. So
it's a great business model. I love that. That's
very, very cool.
Yeah. I like how it can just plug and play too into pretty much like anything from like a 10-person to 100-person company. You're just going to snatch that up immediately, because I don't have to think about that if I'm trying to scale out a company. I'm very happy to pay a little bit, or to pay even a decent amount to have somebody build out that infrastructure for me. I love that idea.
For sure. Yeah. Well, Dylan, I just want to say thank you. Like I literally hunted you down. I was like, what are the top 10 people that I want to have on the show? And you were on that list, and I was like, we'll give it a go. If he doesn't want to do it, that's fine. But I hope that everybody like listen to this and is more fascinated with you than I already am. And I think you're a great guy, and you're doing a lot of amazing work that helps people. And I'm really happy for all the success you're seeing. So I just want to say thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This has been super fun. I've genuinely appreciated the conversation. I appreciate your perspective as well, truly, where you can tell that you have transitioned into your new life in a really healthy way. And I love seeing that. Like, just seeing how stoked you are and having these conversations, it makes me stoked too.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. That's, you got to find your place in life, and sometimes you got to run a lot of tests to get there. So.
Dude, I'm still running tests, like, to this day.
Pushing buttons.
Yeah. Sometimes then you find the right answer and you're like, oh, this feels good now. I'm going to keep this, and then find some other stuff. Like,
yep. Yeah. That's how it is. Yeah. It's like every like decade or something like that. Like my perspective changes on things, and I look back at myself in my 20s and I'm like, questionable decisions, but we made it.
Questionable decisions that were failed tests that you now don't have to run again. Right. And it's cheaper when you're younger, right? You don't have to run that test when you're 40 now. That's probably pretty good.
Yep. Right. The acquisition of knowledge every year we go by.
Oh yeah. Totally. Anyway.
All right, Dylan, thank you so much. Appreciate the time, man. And everybody, I will put a bunch of links to all of Dylan's content and how you can get in touch with him in the show notes. But I appreciate it. Goodbye. Peace.
Thank you, Bill.